Welcome to Horror in Detail, the channel that takes you deep into the chilling heart of the woods, where shadows dance with fear and every rustle of leaves whispers a tale of terror. Prepare to embark on a journey through the darkest corners of the forest and dark woods. First story. This story was shared by Gemini 9. My Deep Woods Experience. All you need to know before I begin this story is, I am a fervent camper. I often take prolonged camping trips alone, and I am very apt at outdoor crafts and am no stranger to being outside in the wilderness, often alone. I still camp to this day, although this experience was the direct cause of a nearly 3-year break in these solo expeditions. I am not willing to divulge any information about myself, my country of origin, or the location of said experience. I will start from the point at which I arrived at a national park that will remain unnamed. I pulled my 2007 Skoda Octavia into a gravel car park and allowed my eyes to wander across the towering fir trees, tightly packed together, shielding the woodland beyond from any of the ever-ebbing sunlight. I'd arrived at the park at 5 p.m., and it was late autumn, so the sun was lowering in the sky beyond the mountains that encapsulated the valley I was in. There were a few other cars sitting in the open space, some of them were empty, seemingly left by other campers, where two had small groups gathered, unslinging packs and stowing camping gear in the rear of the vehicles. I took a deep breath and opened my car door. I walked around to the back of my car and unlocked it. I removed my backpack from the car and slung it over my shoulders. I took my bedroll and tucked it under my arm before locking up my car. I wheeled on my feet, ready to lose myself in nature for a glorious weekend of solitude. I nodded happily to other hikers on my way to the beginning of the trail and set off into the park. I was fairly experienced when this happened, having been a hiker and camper for 13 years already, and a mountain rescue worker for 9 of those. As such, I tended to get off of the trails whenever I could, and find secluded, isolated spots in the woods. I also packed emergency gear, including a flare gun and blank firing pistol for signaling to others I was in danger. Where I come from, hunting is somewhat restricted. However, much of the rules to hunting still applied, one of which was 3 rapid shots usually meant someone is in trouble, and can be used as a way to signal others that you might be lost or hurt. I got off of the trail after around 30 minutes of brisk hiking, and as the daylight wavered ever lower in the sky, I cut myself a path through the thick foliage. The sun had set after about another hour and a half of trekking, and I began using my headlamp. It wasn't much longer before I heard what I had been looking for. When researching the park a week before, I had found a forest survey map, which detailed a mountain stream that fed out of the mountains down into the woods below for around 12 miles, which was situated about 4.5 miles from the trail I had entered on. The sound of babbling water lured me to the edge of the stream, where I cleared a small area for my camp. I erected my tent and gathered some rocks from the brook, which I used to create a small fire pit. I checked my watch, which read 7:50 p.m. I decided it was as good a time as any to eat something, so I got out some beef from my cooler compartment in my backpack and took out one of my steel skewering rods from my kit. After I cooked the meat and drank some water, I decided I wanted to sit in the woods for a bit, taking in the darkness and the sounds. I killed the fire, keeping my fire-starting kit just inside the tent flap, and hung an electronic lantern in my tent, remembering to remove the rain/smoke cap so that the light would be visible through the mosquito netting on the top. I picked my way towards the brook, which I was probably around 5 meters or so away from, and sat on the edge listening to the water trickling. It was deathly silent apart from the brook and the gentle rustling of trees. I could hear the occasional fox whoop and leaves brushing and twigs cracking in the distance. I sat like that for maybe an hour or so before deciding that I wanted to get some sleep, as I had planned a hearty trek up into the mountains the next day, and I would have to start early if I wanted to have a chance of reaching the upper plateau where I could repitch my tent, plus I'd have to leave myself some extra time to fit the storm straps to it, as the winds tended to gust at around 40 miles per hour on in the mountains. I moved back to my tent, following the lamplight until I reached the zippers. I opened it up, and sealed myself inside, laying back on my sleeping bag. I stared up at the lantern, before then reaching up, and turning the knob on the side, until it dimmed to darkness, and then finally off. I sighed heavily. I specifically remember the smell of the woods and the air, and how quiet it was. No road noise carried this far out into the trees. It was magical. I loved every moment of it. It wasn't long though, before I heard something, abruptly interrupting my peaceful night in the wilderness. I stirred and raised my head, squeezing my watch to illuminate the digital screen. 1:34 a.m. bleared into my eyes. I listened intently, turning my right ear towards where I thought the sound was coming from. I squeezed my eyes tightly shut to focus my senses. It sounded like movement, as if something was walking through the woods. The harder I listened, the more I started to realize it sounded bipedal, like a person walking through the woods, dragging their feet through the fallen leaves. Who the fuck would be out here at 1:30 in the morning in the pitch black? I thought to myself. I wondered if someone was perhaps lost. It didn't make sense for a hiker to be out here in the dark wandering around. That's just a really good way of getting yourself lost, and even search and rescue don't search in the darkness unless absolutely necessary, and when we do, we use extremely powerful lights, and 90% of the time a supporting helicopter will provide FLIR to aid a search. I sat up in my sleeping bag, and it fell away from my shoulders. I felt the penetrating cold suck the heat away from my body as I went rigid, concentrating in the darkness, trying to get my eyes to adjust to it and my ears to focus. The sound of the walking seemed to come closer, and I felt my heart pick up a little. I decided that if they came too close, I'd call out. I wanted whatever it was to know I was listening. If it was an animal, it would surely run away. If it was a human, they might need help, and if not, they may think twice about coming any closer. The steps came closer still, so I called out, "Who's there? Do you need help?" In the moments that passed, I could hear my heart thundering in my ears. The footfalls had abruptly stopped, as if whatever or whoever it was had frozen in place. I wasn't too worried about animals. Where I was, the fauna was not considerably dangerous. Wild hogs were the most dangerous creatures out there, although I admit when they're pissed off enough, they can be more than a match for people. Hogs are nocturnal however, but the footfalls sounded too heavy and careless for a wild pig. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing came back. All of a sudden, I heard a loud crack, right next to my left side, as if someone had slapped a stick into a tree trunk, and broken it in half, like I would as a kid. I fumbled for my flashlight and illuminated the end of the tent. It was only then I saw a crumpled piece of material laying at the foot of my sleeping bag. The tent cap. I hadn't put it back on. It was then that I became all too aware that there was a rather large window in the roof of my tent for any would-be stalker. Slowly, I raised my eyes to it. I had spent nearly a decade of my life working out in the wild. I wasn't easily scared. But what I saw above my head in the torchlight terrified me. There above my face were a set of wide, crazed eyes, staring back at me from the void. I screamed aloud and dropped the light, fumbling madly to peel my sleeping bag off of me, and scooped it back up. My fight or flight had kicked in, and I wasn't going anywhere. I tore out of the tent and spun around to face it, yelling angrily, "What the fuck are you doing?" I was met with endless black. Nothing was there. My tent flapped lazily in the gentle breeze. No one was around. I circled the tent a few times, after retrieving my high-powered headlamp, scanning the trees around me. Nothing. I finally crawled back into the tent, noting that it was now nearly 3 a.m. I didn't sleep that night. I just waited eagerly for the first sign of daylight, and in the chilly morning air, I decided I would just get out of the woods, and head up to my mountain camp. The camping areas on the plateau were popular, and usually tents would pitch all along there during the spring to autumn months, so I knew I'd likely be within a few hundred meters of plenty of other hikers or campers 24/7. In the dim dawn, I feverishly packed away my tent, and hoisted my gear onto my back, before heading towards the ever-increasing gradients of the foothills of the mountains at the edge of the valley, the whole while trying to banish the thoughts of the previous night from my mind. Second story. This story was shared Richard Saxon. We found a bunker hidden deep in the woods. It wasn't abandoned. My friends and I used to wander into the dark woods at night, wielding little more than our flashlights and overactive imaginations. It was the surge of adrenaline we needed, gained from harmless, non-existent horror. Lucky for us, there was a forest bordering our neighborhood. It was full of ancient trees that creaked in the wind. Our parents had often warned us about entering the woods, claiming the trees would fall due to the weakest gust of wind. Of course, their warnings fell on deaf ears. We were young, and felt invincible. Though we pretended to be brave, we usually didn't get far into the darkness of the woods, before cowering in fear. Each time, we'd mark how far we'd gotten before giving up. And, each time we set out on a new adventure, we promised each other to break the record. Our last journey occurred on the 29th of October, 2012. Liam and Frank were my best friends. Together, we ventured deeper into the woods than we ever had before. Liam, being a year older, always pretended to have all the experience in the world. He'd hide in the bushes a few yards ahead, and jump out in pathetic attempts at scaring us. Before long, we'd reached the furthest point we'd previously reached. 9th of April, 2012, it read. We kept walking, proud that we'd reached a new milestone. Shortly after, we noticed something in the darkness, contrasting starkly to the trees around it. "Hey, what's that?" Liam asked. "I don't know, let's check it out," I basically yelled in response. As we got closer, we realized it was an old bunker. While it was a cool discovery, it wasn't that uncommon in our country. There were still thousands of concrete bunkers remaining after World War II. Still, we were excited to explore our new findings. Inside, it was rid of any equipment. All it contained was a hole in the middle, with a spiral staircase stretching deep into the ground. "Let's climb down," Liam suggested. I don't know," Frank stuttered. "It doesn't seem like a good idea. The stairs might break and trap us inside." "You're just scared, admit it," Liam teased back. Not willing to admit our nervousness, Frank and I agreed to follow him down the stairs. The stairs themselves were made from metal. Though they felt solid enough, they produced loud, echoing sounds with each step down towards the bottom. After a minute without the end in sight, I started to get scared. "How deep down does this go?" I asked. In response, Liam took Frank's flashlight, and dropped it down the middle of the staircase. It fell, deep into the darkness. Holy crap, I can't even see it anymore. We need to go back. It's too far down, Frank said nervously. No way, we need to see where this leads. A short argument ensued. After some pushing, Frank gave in, and we kept going down. It took us more than 10 minutes just to descend the staircase. As we got further down, it progressively kept getting warmer, and more humid. I could feel the sweat form on my face as we reached the bottom. Once down, we found a large room. It contained little more than a locked door, mold-covered floors, and the broken flashlight Liam had dropped down. It's locked. I guess we have to go back, I weakly insisted. But, Liam had already set out on a search to open the door. Before long, he found a metal panel on the wall. He pried it open, to reveal a lever. I'm going to pull it, he said without consulting us. It produced a loud clunk, and the locked door slid open. Liam and I entered first, while Frank trailed behind us. Without a flashlight, he had no choice but to follow us closely. Inside, we found a narrow hallway filled with open prison cells. Each door to each cell was marked with a date. 7th of July, 1954. 9th of August, 1954. 13th of September, 1954. The first few rooms didn't seem to contain anything other than dust. But, once we got to the end, we noticed something lying in the corner. There, on the floor, lay 3 completely emaciated people. They looked like skeletons covered in a thin layer of pale skin. According to the dates on the cells, they'd been there for more than 50 years. Yet, they hadn't rotted. Are they dead? I asked. As I uttered those words, one of them twitched to life. We jumped at the sight, and prepared to run. Only then, did we realize that some of these creatures had been attached to the ceiling. They dropped down in front of us, and blocked the way. Their limbs were all deformed, too long to further their small body. Still, they moved abnormally fast, almost twitching as they took their steps closer to us. Their eyes had been sewn shut, and they had far too many ribs. They weren't human. Run! Frank yelled. We tried to move towards the exit, ducking under their long arms, and spurting for the door. Frank and I made it easily enough, but Liam got stuck behind one of the creatures. Don't leave me, he yelled, as he tried to maneuver past the sickly thin monster. With that, it reached out its thin arm, and pierced Liam's abdomen. Unable to speak, he simply fell limp where he stood. Only held up by the creature that had killed him. Knowing we could do nothing to save him, Frank and I made a run for it. Our footsteps were dampened by the fungus and mold covering the floor. The things didn't even notice us until we reached the metal staircase. There, our steps rang loud through the metal, alerting the creatures to our location. Without looking behind us, we went up the stairs, only listening as they got closer. I was only a few steps ahead of Frank, but that was all it took for them to get him. I didn't even notice he was gone until I got halfway up the staircase. Then, a scream of agony echoed through the room. It was Frank, and thought I wasn't sure how far he'd gotten. I knew I couldn't help him. I just kept running, up the stairs, and into the woods. I didn't stop to breathe before I finally reached the comfort of the streetlights surrounding my neighborhood. Exhausted from the escape, I collapsed on my own doorstep, and passed out. Safe, but broken. Asterisk. Once I regained consciousness, I told my parents everything. At first, they didn't believe me. But, once the news of 2 missing children spread around our town, the police was alerted. Still, they couldn't confirm my story. They initiated a search and rescue operation. Though they found the bunker I mentioned, there were no traces of any malformed creatures, nor any proof that my 2 best friends died there. To this day, the case remains unsolved. However, since we opened the cages in the bunker, there have been a lot of reported cases of missing children. Unsolvable mysteries. Only I know the truth. I'm sorry, we never should have opened the bunker. Third story. This story was shared by Airsoft Bob. The Cult in the Woods. I am an overweight guy, but I have been on a diet the last couple of months, along with a healthy exercise regime, gym and jogging, to get the weight off. Anyway, here is what this post is all about. I go jogging a couple of nights a week in and around the forest/woods about a mile away from my home, North Wales, UK. I was out jogging in the woods, its genuine name, one night a few days back. I stay off of the track most people would walk along, and run my own set course, deep into the dense trees. I have ran my course a fair few times without anything strange or anything out of the ordinary happening. On Wednesday 22 of August, last week, I was out running just as it is going dark. On this particular night, the atmosphere in the woods felt strange. It felt lonely and cold as there was nobody around. I started jogging through my trail and all was well. The sun was setting, making it darker and darker. I decided to quicken the pace as it was getting a bit too dark for me. I just continued jogging with Biffy Clyro blaring through headphones. Then I had noticed the surroundings looked a bit unfamiliar to me. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere with my low visibility due to the darkness, and when you are jogging you kind of go into a world of your own. If you jog or run, you will know what I mean. I stopped to look around and figure out my bearings. I had no clue which path I had taken, or where I was. I decided the best idea would be to turn back and try to get onto my path, or at least somewhere I recognized. I took my earphones out whilst I was having a slight jog back to familiar ground. By this time it was pretty much pitch black under the canopy of the trees. A slight panic started as I was jogging fast to try and get to somewhere I knew. As I continued to look around, I saw a moving light which was lighting the sides of the trees and the above canopy. The light was quite far away at this point, and I couldn't see what the light source was. I thought this was a bit strange, so I stood still and peered over the nettles/tree branches to get a clearer look. As the light was coming closer, I hear a faint chanting noise coming from the same direction. As it got closer, still couldn't see what it was. The voices got louder. Curiosity got the better of me and I stood around a little longer to see what this was. As I was quite well hidden in the bushes, I felt safe enough to stay. As it got closer, I could eventually see what the light source was. It was a long stick, somewhere around 4 feet long with a ball of fire on the end, a bit like an old-fashioned torch type thing, with a hand, covered in black, sleeve covered in a loose-fitting black fabric. As the figure emerged enough so I could see him, her, they were dressed in full black robes with long hoods. Then, as the first person passed through the trees, more, slowly came passing into sight. They were walking slowly, whilst chanting in another language I have never heard before, not Welsh. Only one of them had the torch in their hand, the person at the front. As they got closer, I then realized if I ran away from them, they would have seen me, and I didn't want to running further into the middle of nowhere as I was already lost. I just crouched down into the bush/nettles as they passed by me. By this point, I could There were about 15 to 20 of them, all walking in sync, chanting the same words. A few would chant something, then the others would chant different words, in a reply kind of thing. As they were walking past me, I felt a horrible feeling I have never felt before. My heart was beating faster, everything felt as if it went colder, freezing cold. As they continued to walk on past me, I saw an insignia on the back of their robes. Sorry for the absolutely shocking image, but you get the idea. This then started me thinking about the Knights Templars, which my granddad told me stories about years ago, and how they escaped to Scotland and Wales when they were disbanded. After they had passed me and were a distance away, I felt safe enough. I ran, faster than I had ran before. I was absolutely shattered, but I ran more and more. Eventually, after a while, I found where I was and I walked, cautiously, home. It took me about 3 hours altogether to do a jog, what usually takes me around an hour and 15 minutes. Some weird stuff happens in this world, and I believe I have witnessed something truly strange, scary and disturbing. I have since changed my path and I always go jogging in the day now. If anyone has witnessed anything like this, please let me know. Thanks. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/CRA2YThunder. Never go into the woods alone. You should never go into the woods by yourself. I've had bad experiences with myself and the woods. I've seen the darkest, deepest parts of the deep dark forest. The parts where the large black man with no face has tried and grabbed me. The parts where I turned around and looked and he was there. I turned and ran, and he pulled me back, and I fell to the ground as the tree slowly cracked and came down just inches from where I was laying. You may ask, do I ever go back into the woods? The answer is yeah, I do. Something draws me to the woods, a deep feeling that pulls me there at an hour before dawn. Maybe it's him, the man in the woods with not face. It could be, but I've never truly thought about it. My wife asks all the time, I just say I'm going hunting. She believes it, but that's not the reason. I couldn't shoot little Bam for the life of me. Anyway, these are my stories. October 17, 2016. I seen the man today. I seen him gliding across the field. Not walking, but gliding above all the crops that were planted, green and lush. He came to a stop and looked right at me. Then, as if he dropped into the ground, he was gone. After that point, I was kinda scared and ran to my four-wheeler and punched it home as fast as I could. October 19, 2016. I walked into the store and bought a camcorder to capture the man so I can truly believe the man is alive. At half to dawn, I walked up to the tree stand that seen him 3 days ago. I bent down, attached the trail cam to the tree, and turned it on. Then I went home. My wife was waiting at the door for me when I got home. My wife is looking at me odd when I walked into the house. I bent down, unlaced my boots and hung up my coat and walked upstairs. She didn't say a word. I knew that was weird. She always hugged or said hi, but she didn't say anything. I looked in the stove and something was cooking, so that was good. I asked her what was in the stove and she didn't answer. I said it louder so she definitely heard it. The rest of that night, she didn't say another word. October 20th, 2016. Lily, my wife returned to normal after last night but not fully. She seems odd. She's not fully there, she's definitely here. She's joking around and being affectionate towards me. I just can't put my finger on what's wrong with her. At 6:30, we both left for work, the long hour trek to my work. This is where things got even weirder. a man that was about 6 feet tall jumped out in front of my car, and rolled up on my roof but didn't come down. I slammed on the brakes, and pulled over on the edge of the road. I unbuckled my seatbelt, and opened the door, and looked around my car really quickly. Not a scratch or dent, and not a slight hint on the man in black. I looked in the ditch and to no avail, nothing. I got back in my car, and drove off 20 minutes to work. Work was as stressful as always, and I was happy when 4 o'clock rolled around. My boss came out of his office and called me in. I got up, walked to his office door and opened it up. He gestured me to sit down and I pulled the chair around. He talked for about 15 minutes about stuff that really didn't matter. After the meeting, the office was empty and I glanced around and seen a tall man in black, with no face in the corner of the room. My boss walked out and asked what I was looking at. I just said nothing and grabbed my coat, and walked out. I drove home at a steady 120 kilometers per hour. I walked into my house and greeting my wife with a kiss and a hug. I got dressed. This time my wife begged me to stay home and just spend a night with her. I sighed and slowly got undressed. She had steaks out, she had everything ready for me to barbecue them. I absolutely loved my wife, and she walked upstairs with wide eyes and an open mouth. I asked what happened. She stuttered, "A man's in the house." I dropped my knife and walked upstairs with my wife following me, and put in my pin for my safe. I pulled out my M9 and slided my clip with 12.22 caliber bullets and pulled the slide back. When I did that, me and my wife both heard the door slam close. I asked my wife what the man looked like and she said tall, black and no face. All my blood pooled in my feet. I told her to pack her bags and get the car keys. I ran out of the house and got onto the four-wheeler and hightailed it back to my trail cam. I grabbed the card out of it, being careful to look around my shoulder every so often. I raced home as quick as I could, grabbed my wife and my bags, put them into the trunk, and got the fuck out of there. My wife still white as a ghost. I can't tell you where we drove to that night. Even if I did know, I can't even recall what way we went. October 22, 2016. Me and my wife recovered from the incident. She's still terrified. I can't blame her though. Anyway, I'm checking the video card of the trail cam today. I know what I saw was real. So I looked at the photos. There was only one on the whole entire card. It was me, the day I attached it to the tree. I snapped it on, and it instantly took one photo. He was in it all right. Right over my shoulder. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. I shut down the computer and I haven't touched it since. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Mr. Fully Semi-Auto. Whispers in the Deep Woods. I'm not normally one to tell stories or post it, but this has haunted me ever since. Frankly, I didn't believe it when it happened to me. I live in a rural county and have for most of my life. I was born and raised in this little town where everyone knows everything that is going on at their neighbors and not much really happens. All there is to do is to be outdoors, so I became quite an avid hunter and nature lover. I would spend my childhood roaming the woods and exploring and learning everything I could and digging up old arrowheads from creeks. I was amazed that there was once people that would roam freely throughout the very woods I knew so well. I often envied them and their knowledge of nature and tried to mimic them by never wasting anything I would kill. Luckily for me, my parents' house shared a property line with a state park, which is a prime hunting ground, so every fall through spring I would hunt anything from squirrels to deer there. About 6 years ago our town started building horse riding trails throughout the county, and it has attracted many people from out of state that post massive amounts of no hunting and trespassing signage in land that I once wandered. The growing amount to travel on these trails on the edges of the park and newly retired novice hunters that would set up tree stands and hunt close to the border has drove the deer into the heart of park. This means I would have to travel farther into the woods if it meant getting a deer. That means that I would be hunting in thicker brush and couldn't pack in a tree stand like I used to. The thought of that never bothered me in the slightest because I've always been a fan of tracking and stalking. This year I decided to hunt in one of the parts of the park that is extremely hard to get to and I haven't been before. When the season finally rolled around after what felt like years of me prepping my bag, packing food and camping gear, checking maps for possible landmarks where deer would travel, and getting my Marlin 45 to 70 sighted in, I couldn't have been more ready. I got up well before sunrise, that way I could slip in unnoticed to the bucks that would be more preoccupied by chasing does than me. After a short drive I get to the trailhead and make my way into the woods. There is nothing like the feeling of the cold air on my face and a small light guiding me through the familiar twisting and turning foliage that makes me feel more at home. After hours of walking the sun started to peek out, though the tree leaned illuminating the land in golden streaks of light. By that time I had picked up a set of tracks on a pretty worn-out deer trail that twisted up a steep hill. I followed the trail, watching my step on every twig and leaf as to not make too much noise and startle my prey. Eventually I made it to a valley where I was sure the deer would be, but as I made my way around the bend of the creek I heard that telltale puff of air a deer lets out when it can tell something is up. I froze and scanned to woods, slowly searching for the white flashes of his tail. All of a sudden the deer trampled off and I was positive it couldn't have busted me. I was downwind and it sounded far enough away that it couldn't have seen me. As I was standing there looking for the track of my lost deer, the woods fell silent. Not a normal kind of quiet, but an ear-piercing, maddening quiet. I know nature is noisy and this is wrong. Crows caw in the distance, the sound of squirrels rummaging throughout the leaves like a bulldozer though a load of gravel, or just the sound of swaying trees in the wind. Anything is a natural sound, but this was off. It felt like the world stopped. I felt very uneasy, like I was being watched by something just out of sight. As I was looking through the brush I heard something. It didn't belong in nature and almost sounded like a voice. At first I thought it was a horse rider that had gotten lost, so I stepped towards where I heard it come from and said, "Hey." As soon as my foot touched the ground it was like someone had unmuted a movie. Nature sprang back to life and it startled me a bit. I quickly brushed it off, and by this time it was getting late and light was slipping, so I sat up camp and told myself I'd find the track in the morning. As I laid in my tent I kept hearing rustling outside, but I figured it was just another squirrel. The next morning I woke up and started to pack my things back up when I noticed something sticking in the side of a tree trunk. It was an arrowhead that was stuck in the tree that I had tied my tent to. From the looks of it, it had been in there so long it was almost completely swallowed by the tree and only the notches and lower part was visible. Seems like some old hunting ground, so I must be in the right place, I thought with a smirk. I sat back off on my hunt for my wandering deer, deeper into the woods than I had been in a very long time. On my expedition though the brush I caught a whiff of the most distinctive smell I know. Fresh blood. It was a small blood trail following along the path of my deer. I was a little confused but followed it to find a rabbit laying on the track. Twisted and mangled. It wasn't eaten, just killed, twisted and contorted in an odd fashion and torn in two. I've never seen any animal do that. Anything that live in these woods would have made a quick snack of it, but not this. Then the silence grew and the overwhelming feeling I was being watched was back. I quickly looked around hoping to see just a flash of whatever lied beyond my view through the thick forest. That was when I heard the high-pitched laugh. It sounded human but like it was off. It didn't stop but only grew faster. I threw my gun to my shoulder and scanned the maze of trees around me. Then, it stopped. There was still no noise besides my breathing. I heard what sounded like someone talking but it wasn't making any sense to me. Like gibberish but repeating what felt like a sentence. I yelled, "Who is there?" Then it stopped. The stillness in making me ears scream, searching for a noise or direction. I finally break free of the hole by gut fell into and take a step back towards home when I hear the gut-wrenching sound of branches break behind me. I turn to look and there is a deer. Standing looking at me. Still, I don't even see its chest moving. Its eyes looked sickly yellow and sunken. The rest of the deer looked unnatural but I couldn't quite figure why. The deer was maybe 100 yards from me but easy enough to see from my scope. Then I heard it again. The whisper. My heart sank when I seen its mouth moving in such an unnatural way. The deer was talking. It sounded like another language. I was frozen. The deer started to twist and thrash, making no noise other than speaking. Its legs popped out of the original shape and face sunk back in to look almost human. I was in shock, looking through the crosshairs of my gun at the creature. It stood at least 8 foot, twisted, and was the most unnatural thing I've ever seen. It opened its mouth to reveal a row of teeth like a predator would have. As soon as this thing stepped my direction, I put a round in its chest. I heard the smack of my bullet against it. My .405 grain bullet is enough to put down a grizzly, especially at this range, but the creature recoiled slightly and let out a almost childlike cry before taking another step towards me. I sent 2 more rounds at it and both let out the thud of a solid contact. The creature fell backwards and screamed yet again before scrambling back into the overgrown brush like a wounded coyote. I stepped towards the area I shot the creature, and to my surprise there was no type of track, not that I would follow this thing anyways, but most importantly, no blood. I shot this thing 3 times and not a single drop of blood anywhere. I hastily turned around and made my way back to safety. As I was quickly making my way through the woods, I could hear something walking behind me. Too far for me to see. I wasn't hunting anymore. I was being hunted. Whatever in the woods with me was following me. I'm a good day trip through the woods with 3 more rounds in my gun and a monstrosity on my heels. I scramble up a rock face to hopefully cut my trip by several hours, and as I top the cliff I see the deer thing looking up at me from the bottom. I try to run a straight shot through the woods. I'm maybe an hour away from the nearest trail and another hour away from the trailhead. I'm at a dead sprint and like a cannon I hear thudding approaching me quick. I spin around and level my gun but nothing is there. When I get to the horse trail I'm greeted by some horse riders and they are pretty worried about me because I'm so out of breath and covered in sweat. I pleaded for us to just go and they agreed to take me to the trailhead. I thought I would never get out of there. I don't know what it was I seen. I won't blame you for not believing me, but please, I beg you. If you hear a whisper in the woods, run. 6th story. This story was shared by you/I_can_spell_now. The cabin in the woods. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, a chance for my friends and I to escape the city and enjoy some time together in the great outdoors. We found the perfect cabin on a secluded piece of property in the middle of the woods, and we couldn't wait to spend a weekend there. The cabin was an old, dilapidated structure, but it had a certain charm to it. It was nestled deep in the woods, far away from civilization and surrounded by tall trees that seemed to tower over us. It was the perfect place to get away from it all and just enjoy the peace and quiet of nature. But as soon as we arrived, strange things started happening. We heard strange noises in the night, and saw shadows moving on the walls when there was no one there. We thought it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us, but as the days went on, the occurrences became more and more frequent and intense. At first, we shrugged it off as just being in an old, unfamiliar cabin. But soon, it became clear that something was very wrong. The shadows seemed to move with a will of their own, and we started to feel like we were being watched. We began to lock ourselves in our rooms at night, too scared to even move. It was on the third night when things took a turn for the worse. I was alone in the cabin and I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find no one there, but I saw fresh footprints in the snow leading away from the cabin. I immediately woke up my friends, but they found nothing when they looked outside. It was as if someone was playing a cruel joke on us. The next day, we found strange symbols carved into the trees surrounding the cabin. It was as if someone had been trying to send us a message, but we had no idea what it meant. We were terrified, and we knew that we had to leave. But as we were packing up our things, we discovered that our car wouldn't start. We were stranded, with no way to call for help. We searched the cabin and found a hidden room in the basement. Inside, we found a strange ritualistic altar covered in blood and human remains. We realized then that the cabin was built on an ancient burial ground and that we had disturbed the spirits of the dead. We were trapped, with no way to escape, and the spirits were closing in. We knew that our only chance was to perform a ritual to appease the spirits and put them to rest. But as we were about to perform the ritual, we heard a knock on the door, and it was a hooded figure that appeared. He explained to us that he was the one who was living on the cabin before us and had gone missing. He had to leave the cabin because he got sick and was unable to continue the ritual that he has been performing to keep the spirits of the dead away. Since he was not able to continue the ritual, the spirits were able to break free and were now after us. He suggested that we should leave the cabin as fast as we could. But we were not able to leave the cabin yet. We have to wait until the next day as it was already too dark to go out and the spirits were roaming around. We had no other choice but to spend the night in the cabin. We spent the night in the cabin, huddled together in the living room, too afraid to even move. We didn't sleep at all, we just waited for the dawn to come, hoping that the spirits would leave us alone long enough for us to make our escape. But as the night went on, the occurrences became even more terrifying. We heard scratching on the walls, and whispering voices in our ears. We were convinced that the spirits were trying to claim us for themselves. As morning finally came, we grabbed our things and prepared to leave. The hooded figure had warned us that we would have to perform a ritual to pass through the spirits safely. So, we gathered all the materials we could find and performed the ritual, hoping it would be enough to protect us. We opened the door and stepped out into the cold morning air. At first, everything seemed normal. But as we began to make our way down the path leading away from the cabin, we started to feel a sense of dread creeping over us. The spirits were all around us, watching and waiting. We were in a state of complete panic as we stumbled through the woods, trying to find our way to safety. We could hear the spirits all around us, closing in, and we knew that they were angry. They were furious that we had disturbed their resting place and were determined to make us pay. We were running as fast as we could, but we knew it wouldn't be enough. The spirits were gaining on us, and we could feel their cold breath on our necks. We were so close to the main road, but it felt like it was miles away. Just as we were about to give up hope, we saw a car in the distance. We ran towards it, waving our arms and yelling for help. The car slowed down and stopped, and we got into the back seat, tears streaming down our faces. The driver looked back at us and asked, "Are you okay? What happened?" We told him about the cabin in the woods and the spirits that were chasing us. He listened with a look of concern on his face, and when we finished, he started the car and got us out of there. We never spoke of that cabin again. But the memory of it still haunts us to this day. We all have had nightmares of the cabin and the spirits, and we can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, waiting for us to return. 7th story. This story was shared by you/Jackafuyu. My advice is simple: don't take a walk in the woods at night. I shouldn't have been so foolish as to take a walk in the woods at such an hour. I feel even more foolish to have brought my little brother along with me. A good idea is what I thought. Me and my brother, just hanging out, shooting the shit, and afterwards we would grab some grub. Once arriving, the skies seemed a little gray, but we both agreed to at least hurtle ourselves a small way through the woods. Before we knew it, we were a little farther in than we had planned. The night swallowed the forest quickly, so we decided to hightail out. On our walk back, it got dark, really dark, thus, I plopped out my flashlight and let the light cast over our desired direction. I joked about what could be hiding in the woods to my little brother, hoping our not-so-settled gap in age would allow me to give him the willies. It worked, but unfortunately, what I didn't account for was his fear to become slightly contagious. I was just waiting for the snapping of a branch to whip my consciousness into a slight panic. I felt nervous of what may lay beyond the circumference of the light, so much so that I almost couldn't pull the beam into another direction. Our voices went silent, both of us unconsciously fearing that something may hear us. Each step taken by the two of us was amplified and seemingly impossible to muffle. I was scared. I was consumed in thought when my brother pulled my sleeve and silently spoke, "What's that, over there?" I saw another beam of light ahead of us. This beam stayed constant and bright. As we ventured further, the beam became closer, and closer, and closer. At one point, I could see what was causing this beam of light. Two figures in the distance were walking ahead of us. I felt a little relieved and told my brother, "There's nothing to worry about, just some guys that had the same idea as us most likely." The static feeling throughout my body slowly settled, and I felt more comfortable walking back. Soon, something about the individuals in front of us caught my eye. The clothes they were wearing, they were the same as I and my brothers. I nudged my brother, but before I spoke, I saw the person ahead of me do the same thing. It's the way he did it that caught my eye. The arm didn't smoothly move over to the person beside them as I had done to my brother. Instead, the arm jerked in a quite quick, unnatural whip, like a puppet. I was taken aback by the sight, not acknowledging my brother who kept pestering me in a whisper. "What? What is it?" he kept saying under his breath. I replied nervously, "And nothing." My brother caught on quicker than the flick of a switch. He too acknowledged the fact that the clothes they wore were familiar to us. My brother grabbed my arm and assertively choked out, "Stop." I did, and the people in front of us did the same. My brother looked at me and spoke in a quick pace, "Something's wrong here. This isn't normal. I know, I said. But we have to be calm and keep going, okay? My brother nodded. That was my only solution at the moment. Be quiet, try not to say anything, no sudden movements, and keep going until we find our way out. I'm not smart, but I have been in a few dangerous situations, and have picked up this method from them. My brother on the other hand has never been confronted with the such, and was starting to panic. I was just as guilty as him in that aspect. Whatever was ahead of us got closer and closer, even when we slowed down our pace, what was ahead of us slowed down even more so. Then we noticed it from behind, a beam of light. I was shivering. We were very close to them now, and their footsteps were louder than before. My brother spoke in a squeamish tone, "We have to do some dash." He stopped speaking as something else started to in its hellish garbled tone, repeating my brother's words. It came from the thing in front of us, and behind us. I didn't want to turn around and confirm that there were two more, but I knew. I knew that the further we would get, the closer they would become. Even if we were close to the entrance, it would be too late by then. I had to think fast. I grabbed my brother's arm, turned off the flashlight, and leaped as quickly as I could into the bushes. We ran for a bit, not wanting to be too far off from the path. We ducked as far down as we could and huddled together. Looking back, we saw them, 6 pairs to be exact. I was guessing we were in the middle of them before we ran. The beams of light were pointed in our direction, but not on us, thankfully. Soon, the beams of light turned away and continued to walk along the path. We followed, not closely whatsoever, but enough so that we could keep track of where the trail was. Those people came to a fork in the road which we had come across on our way through, and by a miracle, they took another way than the one we had come from. I instructed my brother to sprint down the trail we had taken on 3, and we did. It was not much farther from here, I thought, car keys already in hand. We were huffing our lungs out, trying desperately to make it to the car quick. My brother screamed. I turned and was met with a murder of eyes. This point in time was something I would never forget, yet, never be able to describe thoroughly. The only thing I could accurately remember is how they ran. It was identical to something wild, fiercely about to pounce its prey. They were so close. I saw the end of the trail, and attempted to press the button on my keys to unlock the car. They fumbled out of my left hand, but by a mere stroke of luck, my right hand caught it while my body was in the process of propelling itself toward the car. I pressed the unlock button, the headlights flickered. We came to the car, my brother opening and closing the door as fast as he could, and I following in his mannerisms. I shoved the keys in and jerked the vehicle into motion. However, before I could start moving, my brother simply said, "Look." There they were. All 12 in pairs of 6, looking at us, beams almost blinding, yet, you could see the horrible image that scarred their faces. Silence bewitched the woods and caressed our voices. Reality soon whipped me back into motion as my instincts wailed, "Go." Like that, we were off. At home, with burgers in our mouths, my brother wouldn't stop talking about it. I always hear about people going silently stiff after such circumstances, but my brother would not shut up about it. This may sound weird, but I didn't want him to. His voice kept me comfortable, and I entertained his ramblings of what could have been. I'm so glad he's safe. I hope you stay safe as well, and to assure that, I must urge you this. It's not a very good sign if you're not the only one with a flashlight on in the woods. 8th story. This story was shared by you/Worcester_ST. I took a picture of a creature deep in a national forest. A few days ago, my little brother Rob and I set out on a multi-day hiking trip through the Appalachian Mountains. We're both pretty good outdoorsmen and brought only what we could carry on our backs. We purposefully set off to avoid established trails, hoping to discover someplace that no one had ever explored before. The first 2 days were beautiful. We walked through trees, crossed some small streams, and took some great pictures. The temperature was unseasonably warm, so much so that we often took off our sweaters to not overheat. It was the third day that the strangeness started. As we climbed a ridge, Rob noticed that some of the dirt had been eroded away, leaving stone. Somebody had clearly carved stairs into the stone. We followed them as we climbed. If you've spent any time in the woods, you know that there are several telltale signs of human activity. Trash, campfires, that sort of thing. We hadn't seen any of them up to this point, so seeing stairs excited and confused us. How old were they? Were they carved by Native Americans? The stone path continued deeper into the woods. We didn't have a better plan, so we decided to see where it led. At times it was hard to keep track of, but after some searching, we would always pick it up again. Later that night we set up our tent and I stepped outside to look up at the stars. They were not the same stars that I'd seen the past 2 nights. Now, I know many of you may be asking me what I mean. After all, most people can only identify the Big Dipper or Orion's belt at most. Not me though. I'm studying astronomy in college right now. My on-campus job is to align telescopes to the right spot in the right constellation. So when I tell you the stars were not right, I know what I'm talking about. There were stars, for sure. Just not any constellations I recognized. And that's what unsettled me the most. I returned to the campsite to tell Rob, but he cut me off. "Does it smell strange to you?" he asked. It did. I couldn't explain it very well, but the air smelled off. They say that smells activate memories more than any other sense, and this one was powerful. It reminded me of a cave I'd nearly been trapped in as a teenager. It reminded me of the car accident I'd seen a year back. I don't mean to say it actually smelt like any of those things, just that it reminded me of them somehow. We went to bed feeling uneasy. Our compass still worked, and I told myself I might have missed constellations due to overworking myself. I knew that wasn't true, but it's what got me to sleep that night. The next day we set out again, determined to get through this strange part of the forest. The sense of disorientation from the night before got worse and worse though. If we weren't staring directly at our compasses, we found ourselves lost in the woods, forced to hack our way back onto the stone path. The forest grew thick and muggy, and the trail led us into a steep valley. We were forced to continue forward. I kept seeing something in the woods out of the corner of my eye. Rob reported seeing the same thing. The forest was dark though, despite it being near midday. We started switching off which one of us was the guide, but the forest was so thick that it was hard to keep an eye on our compasses for long. "Dude," Rob said from in front of me. I paused, following his gaze. He was staring up at a tree. 3 squirrels were hanging from it, each with trails of blood soaking the tree beneath them. A symbol was carved above them that I didn't recognize. We stared at it for a long time, not sure of what to do. The squirrels couldn't have been more than a few days old. We talked about it, and made the decision to push on ahead. We were almost through the park, and we'd come across a road if we made it through to the other side. We might not have made that decision if we knew we'd pass a dozen more trees just like that one along the stone trail. Some trees were strung up with squirrels, but we saw raccoons, bunnies, even the remains of a deer rotting on a tree. We tried not to look at them and instead pressed on with more speed. We were pausing to drink some water when I heard a low croaking sound from behind us. I turned, and for the first time saw the black figure. It was a woman, crouched down in the underbrush. She was staring at the two of us. My entire body screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. The smell from earlier was thick and heavy in the air. I swapped my phone to the camera and took a picture, not daring to move. The snap of my phone was enough to break us out of our trance, and we took off running. We followed the stone trail back the way we'd come, not slowing down until we were puffing for air. We looked around, but didn't see her. When we'd caught our breath a little, we continued, not stopping until we'd passed the first stone steps on the ridge late that night. I'm not sure what we saw, or what it was. If anyone has heard about an entity like this in the forest, please let us know. I'm scared. It's been a few days, and I still smell it. 9th story. This story was shared by you/Arthagus. The Deep Woods Rain. Hello, my name is Araji Fisher. My therapist advised me to write down what I've been through, so I suppose I will. It's been a week, and I typically have bad memory, but I still remember everything vividly, so damn vividly. I'll try my best to recount the details, but, after all I've been through, I can't promise it will be good. Now, where to begin? It started with a trip I decided to take. I was getting exhausted and tired with people and society, and really just life in general. I decided I'd go camping in some deep woods. I'd rather not state the location, however. Apologies for that. There were beautiful, lush trees, I could hear the birds singing, and animals moving about. The bugs were a bit annoying, but it was worth it. The way the light filtered beneath the gently moving leaves, the soft breeze coming in from the west, the light rustling of foliage as small animals moved, it was a beautiful sight. I took the camping supplies I packed out of the back of my truck, double-checked I had everything, and decided to head north, since I came from the south. There weren't really many paths here, it was just wilderness, in some back road dead end I decided I'd go to. I wandered for a while in the woods, making sure to keep a map on hand, and a compass, tracing where I went. Eventually, I came across a nice-looking clearing. I cleared the area of rocks, debris, pieces of wood, and anything that would make sleeping rough, then I set up my tent, a nice deep green small tent, just large enough for me and my travel pack. I checked the distance and time I'd hiked, and saw it was only about 1 kilometer and around 10 minutes. Just after, I looked to the sky to get a rough estimate of the time, and noticed the sun was beginning to set. On the other side of the horizon, I noticed a large amount of clouds rolling in. Just my luck. No matter what it is, I always seem to forget something. It's usually just one thing, whether it's a spice in a recipe, or in this case, checking the weather. I decided I'd take a walk around where I set up before going to bed. I spent around 30 minutes or an hour or so, I'm bad at keeping track of time, just slowly walking around, admiring nature, before I decided to return to my tent. As I approached, I felt like something was off. The closer I got, the more the feeling grew, and grew. I was having trouble figuring out exactly what it was, but then I noticed. The tarp on my tent was slightly damp. I felt a little nervous, since I'm generally a bit of a paranoid person, so I quietly walked around the perimeter of my tent. I didn't see anything odd. Finally, I ended at the entrance, and noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I cautiously approached, listening carefully. As I got close, my nerves started acting up. Stupid anxiety. I told myself to just shrug it off, but I couldn't. I don't know why, but I froze. I was scared something would be in there. I managed, after about a minute of standing still with one hand reaching towards the door, to open the front of the tent. Everything was normal inside. I let out a long sigh of relief, and felt around. Everything was dry, apart from a small damp patch near the door. The sun was almost down, and it was getting darker. I decided I'd go to bed now, as the sounds of wildlife were shifting from diurnal to nocturnal creatures. I laid down in my cozy little snug sleeping bag, made sure everything was neatly organized, still in my bed, and went to bed. I awoke to the sound of rain falling. I'd recon a few hours later, and felt a little groggy. I realized I had to go to the bathroom, which would mean having to leave the tent. I sighed deeply, part of me regretting my choice to camp, and I turned to go get my raincoat out of my bag. I always come prepared, even if I forget things. I paused as I shifted, something didn't feel quite right. I listened to the sound of the rain falling for a while, before I noticed what it was. There was a wet splash coming from outside. I paused, and listened carefully. I noticed it was following a pattern, and sounded like large raindrops splashing in puddles. It was circling my tent, keeping the same pace while doing so. It was at that moment something else occurred to me. The raindrops on my tent were much lighter here and less frequent than those on the ground coming from the direction of whatever was circling my tent. The rain was very light, apart from in that one specific area. Slowly, I reached over to my bag. I always stored a small pocket knife in the side pouch of my bag for self-defense. I wanted to make sure I was protected when I confronted whoever or whatever it was. Maybe it was just a really wet raccoon or something, sloshing up the water. I slowly crept to the edge of my tent, and paused. I waited for the footsteps to go behind my tent, before I slowly zipped a small crack in the zipper so I could see out, as quietly and slowly as I could. I waited for what felt like forever, but, as cliché as this is, was likely just a few seconds. I know that's something that's said a lot, but you really don't realize how accurate it is until you've experienced it yourself. I heard the footsteps approaching where I was peeking, and to my horror I saw some strange-looking thing. It was about the size of a human, but appeared to be made entirely of water. I couldn't make out too much of its features due to the darkness of night and clouds, but I did notice the shine of water, and the dripping. I felt like I was being watched. Like it knew I was here. Like it was going to come for me sooner or later, or it was waiting for me to make a move. I slowly shifted back inside, and started to breathe to calm my nerves. In, hold, out, pause. In, hold, out, pause. I started to focus again and, still listening to the sounds, slowly and quietly made sure to get myself in order, putting on my raincoat, getting my bag ready, and putting it on. I made sure I was holding my keys in a way that I could easily unlock my car when I got there. I waited for the thing to move in front of my tent. I watched as it walked by, and as soon as I was sure it wouldn't see me, carefully and quietly, but swiftly, opened the door. I took a deep breath, and as I heard it was on the opposite side, I thanked past me for facing the tent towards the car, and I started sprinting. Immediately, I heard whatever it was start chasing, and I heard the splashing of its footsteps. I heard my tent tear, as it ran through it, I'd estimate at the same pace as me, or ever so slightly slower. I couldn't slow down, I couldn't mess up. I ran through the trees, weaving my way through, and I heard several loud slaps of water against the trees, seeming like it didn't need to navigate through the trees. I was almost to where my car was when I tripped on a root, and landed with a hard thump, catching myself with my hands, on a rock. This was it. I was done for. I saw my life flash before my eyes, and I heard its weight shift, and I felt a massive amount of pain on my side, and I passed out. I woke up a few hours later, in a lot of pain. The sun was out, and I could hear the wildlife. It took me a few seconds to realize I wasn't dead, and I immediately shifted over to check my bag, and to no longer be face down on a muddy rock. As soon as I did, a searing pain shot through my right side. I looked down, and noticed I was wounded. My bag was torn apart, my shirt with a large gash, and bleeding. The wound was deep, but not too deep. I'm lucky it didn't kill me, but I felt lightheaded and hazy. The bleeding seemed to have stopped due to my shirt being slightly displaced, and the wetness causing it to cling to my body. I used my torn and broken backpack to cover the wound, grabbed as much of the contents as I could and quickly headed to my truck. The windows of my truck were cracked, and a lot of the paint seemed to be damaged. I quickly found my keys, luckily they hadn't slipped out of my hand, and opened the door. I then dropped everything in the passenger seat. I was about to go retrieve the rest of my items and equipment when I heard a soft splash, splash. I immediately got into my truck, started the engine, and drove out of there, returning home. Before I was gone, however, I noticed a blurry silhouette in the rear view mirror. I decided I didn't want to see it more clearly. I relayed all of this to my therapist, and he suggested I say what happened. So, I guess writing it down did help a bit. I still worry that it's out there, but I know for damn sure I'll never get near it, and I'll never camp again. 10th story. This story was shared by you/emotional_wall7957. My encounter with a terrifying cult in the woods. This happened 5 years ago in Northern California, but I won't provide more details. Feel free to ask questions. My name is Sarah, and the night my friend Emily and I stumbled upon a terrifying cult in the woods was supposed to be a fun adventure. Emily's then boyfriend had recommended the forest to us, having hiked there before. I had just moved from my home country in Europe to the US 1 year earlier because I met an American guy who had been studying in my country. Despite being an avid hiker and having explored trails in various parts of Europe and Asia, I never expected that this hike would turn into a nightmare. As a blonde girl with blue eyes, I've had my fair share of experiencing weird things and dangerous situations while hiking. But what we encountered that night was like something out of a Hollywood movie. None of us had ever been there before, but we had heard that it was beautiful and peaceful. As we hiked deeper into the woods, we began to notice strange symbols etched into the trees and rocks. The symbols appeared to be a mix of geometric shapes and abstract patterns. Some were simple lines and circles, while others were more complex and seemed to be intertwined with one another. Some of the symbols appeared to be repeating, while others were unique. As we hiked deeper into the woods, we saw more and more of these symbols etched into the landscape. They seemed to be guiding us towards the ritual site, as if they were marking the path to something important. It was an eerie feeling, as if we were trespassing in a sacred place that we didn't belong. I researched the meaning of the symbols later on, but it was difficult to say. They didn't seem to be connected to any specific religion or cult, but rather a product of some mystic or spiritual belief. It was as if they had been created by someone with a deep understanding of both geometry and mysticism. Looking back on it now, it's hard not to think about how strange those symbols were, and what kind of belief system they might have represented. It was clear that the people performing the ritual took them very seriously, and that they were an integral part of their practice, but for us, they were nothing more than mysterious etchings on the trees and rocks. At the time, we certainly noticed them and thought they were odd, but we didn't pay them much attention. We were too busy enjoying the beauty of nature around us, and the symbols seemed like just another part of the scenery. It wasn't until we heard the chanting that we realized something was wrong. Intrigued and curious, we followed the sound, hoping to see what was going on. But we certainly didn't expect to find a group of people dressed in black robes, performing a ritual around a large fire. It was like something straight out of a movie. The chanting grew louder and more intense, but we couldn't make out the words. The cultists, around 20 in number, were all clad in black robes, some with peculiar symbols painted on their faces and others donning eerie masks. They encircled a towering bonfire, the flames leaping high into the night sky, casting a flickering orange glow across their sinister faces. In front of the fire stood an altar, adorned with flickering candles and other peculiar objects. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I watched in disbelief as one of the cultists produced a white rabbit and proceeded to sacrifice it on the altar. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and one of the cultists approached the fire with a small wooden box from within his robes. He opened it, revealing a vial containing an unknown substance, which he carefully dripped onto the flames. Suddenly, my eyes were drawn to a figure on a table near the altar. A woman, her body painted with intricate designs, lay still with her eyes closed, breathing gently as if in a deep slumber. The cultists around the fire were swaying in unison, holding candles aloft as if entranced by some dark magic. As the chanting grew louder still, the woman on the table began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, and she sat up, looking around with a vacant expression. The cultists began to approach her, their faces twisted in ecstasy, as if they were under some kind of spell. All of a sudden, the woman let out a piercing scream and fell back onto the table, her body writhing in agony. The cultists dispersed, their faces now twisted in frustration and disappointment, as if the ritual had somehow failed. As they wandered around in confusion, one of them spotted us and the rest of the cultists turned their attention towards us. They looked angry, as if they blamed us for interrupting their ceremony. I could feel their menacing stares as they began to approach us, their black robes billowing in the wind. We ran as fast as we could, but they were always right behind us. "I don't think we can outrun them," Emily gasped. "We need to find somewhere to hide." I nodded in agreement and scanned our surroundings frantically. That's when we spotted an old cabin up ahead. We ran inside and slammed the door shut, hoping it would hold. We could hear the cultists pounding on the door, and we knew it was only a matter of time before they broke through. We searched the cabin for any weapons we could find, and that's when we found an old axe. We knew it wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. We huddled together, ready to defend ourselves, when suddenly we heard yelling outside followed by the sound of wolves howling close by. It was an eerie sound that sent chills down our spines. We didn't know if it was a good or bad sign, but at least the cultists had stopped pounding on the door. We were terrified, but we finally mustered the courage to peek outside. To our shock, the cultists were gone and there was no sign of them. It was like they had vanished into thin air. We stayed in the cabin a few hours until we decided to make a run for it back to our car. We knew it was a risk, but we couldn't stay in the cabin forever. We opened the door cautiously, ready to bolt if we saw any sign of the cultists. We ran as fast as we could through the woods. We kept moving, trying to stay on the path we had taken earlier. We didn't know how long we had been running, but our legs were starting to feel like jelly. We kept running, the dense forest started to thin out, and we could see a clearing up ahead. Just as we thought we had made it, we saw them. 2 cultists emerged from the tree line, their eyes fixated on us like predators. The sight of their black robes and masks made my blood run cold. They were holding long, sharp knives in their hands, glinting menacingly in the dappled sunlight. We skidded to a stop, our hearts racing in our chests. But just as they were about to close in on us, we heard a gunshot ring out. The cultists paused for a moment, startled, and we took the opportunity to run past them. As we looked back, we saw a figure emerge from a cabin up on a hill. The cabin was surrounded by a cleared radius of trees, presumably to prevent wildfires. The figure was dressed in a ranger's uniform, holding a gun in their hand. They shouted out a warning to the cultists, who seemed to think better of pursuing us any further. We kept running until we were sure we were out of danger. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for air and shaking with fear. We explained everything to the ranger, and he quickly called for backup. The police took our statements, and we led them back to the cabin where we had taken refuge. The officers searched the area, but they found no trace of the cultists. They told us that they would continue their investigation and that we should go home and stay safe. Emily and I got into our car, still trembling from the adrenaline and fear. We drove back to our homes, grateful to be alive but still shaken by what had happened. Over the next few days, we followed the news closely, hoping for any updates on the cult and their whereabouts. But there was no news, and the incident seemed to have been forgotten. Months passed, and Emily and I tried to move on from the terrifying experience. But every time we went into the woods or heard a strange noise, we couldn't help but remember that night. One day, we both received a letter in the mail. It was a handwritten note, with no return address. I opened it cautiously, unsure of what to expect. The letter read, "We know what you saw, and we know what you heard. But you should know that you are not safe. We are always watching, and we will come for you." Emily and I were terrified once again, and we immediately called the police. They assured us that they would investigate and take the letter as evidence material. However, we knew that the handwriting couldn't be recognized as belonging to any specific person since it appeared to be deliberately messy and inconsistent, almost as if the author had written it with their non-dominant hand. We hoped that the police would be able to catch the person responsible, but we knew that it would be difficult with such little evidence. We knew that we couldn't rely on the police alone. We started taking self-defense classes and installed security cameras around our homes. We never went into the woods again and always carried some form of protection with us. One becomes paranoid after such an experience, especially after receiving that letter. It felt like people were following me. Strange individuals who just stood and stared. But whether it was just my imagination, I'm not sure. Years passed, and we never heard from the cult again, but we couldn't help but wonder if one or more of the cultists knew us. They must have obtained our addresses from somewhere, and it made us feel uneasy. After receiving multiple reports of strange noises and suspicious activity in the woods, the police and rangers collaborated to increase patrols in the area. This led to the arrest of 3 individuals who were suspected of being involved in illegal activities such as drug trafficking and animal cruelty. During the raid, the police found evidence of animal remains and drug paraphernalia, which confirmed their suspicions about the involvement of these individuals in criminal activities. They were charged with multiple offenses, including animal cruelty, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to commit illegal acts. Despite the best efforts of the police and other authorities, the investigation into the strange incidents in the woods and the incidents involving us continued for several months. However, the investigation was eventually closed, as they were unable to find any concrete evidence linking the arrested to these incidents. The strange incidents in the woods stopped, but the fact that most of the cultists were still free and at large left many questions unanswered and was unsettling. It was unclear if they had disbanded or if they were continuing their activities elsewhere. The police remained vigilant and continued to monitor the area, but there were no further reports of suspicious activity or strange occurrences. The incident remained a mystery, and the true intentions of the cultists and the full extent of their activities were unknown. It was a sobering reminder that there were still groups out there operating in secrecy, and that we may never know the full extent of their actions. From what was discovered, it appeared that the group was attempting to summon some sort of spiritual entity or deity, using various objects such as candles, incense, and herbs. It was speculated that the cultists may have been practicing some form of neo-pagan or occult religion, though this was never confirmed. Some of the objects found at the site suggested a connection to ancient religions or mythologies, though it was unclear if these were authentic artifacts or simply replicas. Overall, the specifics of the ritual remained a mystery, as the arrested individuals denied any involvement and refused to divulge any information about their activities. Looking back, I still can't believe that I had never heard of the cult before. It's scary to think that such a dangerous group could be operating right under our noses without anyone knowing. As much as I wanted to forget that night, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the fortunate events that allowed us to escape unharmed, despite the potential danger we faced that night. The thought of what might have happened if the cultists had managed to enter the cabin still sends shivers down my spine. And then the ranger showed up just in time to save us from the two others. If it weren't for these fortunate events, who knows what could have happened to us. It was as if fate had intervened to protect us from harm, or as some higher power was looking out for us that night. We later learned about superstitions surrounding the woods we were in, strange happenings and unusual occurrences in these parts. Some even believed that the forest was cursed and that those who entered were doomed to suffer misfortune. Perhaps the cultists themselves were aware of these superstitions and were afraid of what might happen if they continued their pursuit. Maybe they had some superstition around the cabin. Or maybe they had encountered something even more terrifying than they had bargained for. Wolves don't normally attack people, let alone a group of 20 armed individuals. So why should the cultists be scared? As for the wolves, it's possible that their howling had some significance in the local folklore and the cultists were wary of disturbing them. It's also possible that the wolves simply acted as a deterrent, scaring off the cultists with their pack mentality and aggressive behavior. Perhaps it was the sheer number of wolves that made the cultists back off, or maybe it was the unexpectedness of the situation. As for the yelling, it could have been a disagreement between the cultists themselves. The weird part is that the cultists didn't come back to the cabin. We waited anxiously for a while, wondering if they would return, but they never did. And then, the next day, we encountered two cultists in broad daylight. It didn't seem like they had been running, and they were coming from the opposite direction of where we had fled. We hadn't seen anyone following us, and we had run so fast that it seemed unlikely that they could have caught up to us. It was a strange and unsettling experience that left us with more questions than answers, and the mystery surrounding the events only added to the eerie atmosphere of the forest. But one thing was certain, We had survived an encounter that could have easily ended in tragedy, and for that, we were fortunate. I don't hike anymore. The thought of being out in the woods and encountering the unknown was no longer thrilling, but terrifying. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, of being followed. What did the cultists want with us? Did someone know us? Was the letter only meant to scare us? Are we still in danger? These questions still haunt me to this day. As time passed, we went back to our normal lives and eventually moved out of the area. That night in the woods was a wake-up call for me, a reminder to always stay vigilant, aware, and never underestimate the dangers that could be lurking. Who knows what other dangers are out there, waiting to be discovered. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.